Mnangagwa might be the president of the country, but he's a weak man.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going straight into a really compelling and, frankly, quite sobering discussion. You shared the extensive interview between Trevor and Tendai Biti, the lawyer and, of course, former finance minister in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
And we've been, absorbing his insights into the country's situation.
Yes, this in conversation with Trevor is, it's a really powerful lens, isn't it, to understand the complexities facing Zimbabwe.
Definitely.
Especially coming directly from someone who's been so deeply involved.
Right.
So for you, the learner, our mission here is really to extract the most crucial knowledge Biti shares. We want to clarify his intricate arguments, maybe highlight the most striking bits of his analysis.
And give a deeper grasp of those interwoven crises he talks about.
Exactly. We're looking at the underlying patterns, the recurring issues, and the very real impact this has on everyday Zimbabweans.
What's immediately striking, I think, is how Biti frames Zimbabwe's difficulties.
Yeah.
He doesn't see them as, isolated events.
No, not at all.
But as a deeply entrenched cycle. He makes this point that roughly every decade, Zimbabwe seems to get hit by a convergence of crises.
A pattern he traces all the way back to 1888.
Okay, let's unpack this. 1888, that's quite a historical reach. What's his core argument for this recurring pattern?
Well, his key insight really is that Zimbabwe seems to lack those self-correcting mechanisms you see in, let's say, more modern, stable democracies. He argues a fundamental reason for this is the absence of a genuine culture of dialogue, of listening, across the political spectrum and within society.
And he thinks that goes way back.
Yeah, deep roots. Stemming from the sort of top-down, often forceful nature to the colonial era, he uses strong words, brigands, and then followed by a similar, maybe autocratic style within the liberation movement itself, which was essentially an army.
So it's like one centralized, potentially authoritarian system just replaced another one?
Pretty much.
And that kind of set a precedent for resolving things through power, not discussion?
Precisely. The liberation movement, just by its nature, wasn't a democratic setup. And this hierarchical command and control thing, well, unfortunately, it seems to have carried over into how the country's been governed. He even points to the tragic violence of the 1980s as a really stark example of how early challenges were met with force, not dialogue, leaving these lasting wounds.
Right.
And while he acknowledges brief periods of, relative calm, like after the 1987 Unity Accord.
Yeah, he mentions that.
He sees them as just temporary breaks within this larger ongoing context of instability.
Yeah.
It paints a picture of a country really struggling to break free from these historical patterns.
Absolutely. Now, one of the points BT makes that really resonated, I thought, was about the abandoned citizen. What's the essence of that idea?
What's particularly insightful there is his observation that ordinary Zimbabweans have, basically out of necessity, increasingly organized their lives almost entirely independently of the state. Well, he gives very concrete examples. People investing in generators, solar power, because the national grid is just unreliable.
Okay.
They're drilling their own boreholes for water because state water infrastructure has failed. Relying on imported food, often from South Africa, because local supply chains are broken. It's like the state's ability to provide the basics has just severely eroded.
It sounds like the state has become almost peripheral to their day-to-day survival.
Exactly. And to really drive this home, he shares this incredibly moving story from when he was finance minister.
Oh, yeah?
He visited a township where children had literally never seen tap water flowing. They had no concept of what a water pipe was even for.
Wow. That's a truly striking image.
It powerfully illustrates the profound failure of the state, doesn't it? Delivering even the most fundamental services.
Yeah. And what are the broader consequences of this disengagement between citizens and the state?
Well, Biti argues it's led to this deep, pervasive loss of trust. He contends that for many Zimbabweans, their main interaction with the state is through its armed expression.
Meaning police or military.
Right, or when they're being taxed, which they often see as excessive and not really delivering benefits back to them.
So the state is seen more as taking, not giving.
Exactly. More of an extractive entity than a provider or protector. So people actively try to minimize their reliance on it, their contact with it. It's a fundamental breakdown, really, in that relationship.
It sounds like the very foundation of a functioning society is being undermined there. Now, you mentioned Benice's point about the regime potentially thriving on a lack of agency among people. Can you elaborate on that link?
Yeah, if we connect it back to this idea of the abandoned citizen, Biti suggests this enforced independence, this, struggle for daily survival outside the state. It can inadvertently lead to a sense of fatalism.
A feeling that you can't change things.
Right, a feeling that individuals have little control. He argues this is particularly common in rural areas.
Okay.
And the ruling party, in his analysis, then exploits this sense of powerlessness. They might occasionally offer small bits of assistance, presenting themselves as the providers of relief.
Even though, in his view, their policies created the problems in the first place.
Exactly. It's a kind of cycle of manufactured dependence almost.
Yeah.
Creating the problem, then positioning yourself as the solution.
But he does make a distinction between urban and rural communities on this, doesn't he?
Yes, he observes that in urban areas, there's generally maybe a clearer understanding of cause and effect. People are more likely to link their hardships directly to state actions or inaction.
What?
But despite this urban awareness, he warns the overall trajectory, widespread disengagement, creeping fatalism, it's ultimately unsustainable. He describes the nation as being on a knife edge.
A risk of collapse.
A significant risk of internal collapse, yeah. He draws a parallel to the situation just before the events of 2017. It's a very serious warning about the country's current stability.
It certainly is. And Biti doesn't just focus on the political and economic stuff. He also paints a really troubling picture of the social consequences.
Yeah, that's deeply concerning, the level of social breakdown he describes. He talks about a significant weakening of the family unit.
How so?
Evidenced by, he says, unprecedentedly high divorce rates. He even notes that early in his legal career, divorces by consent were like a minor admin thing.
Right.
But now there's an entire court just dedicated to handling the sheer volume. That really underscores the scale of disruption at a really fundamental level.
That statistic about the divorce court, yeah, that brings the human cost into sharp focus.
Absolutely. He also highlights the alarming rise in teenage pregnancies, child marriages, despite legal efforts to stop them. And then there's that truly horrifying statistic he cites. 6 illegal abortions happening every single hour in Zimbabwe.
6 an hour. Goodness.
Beyond these strains, he also points to widespread drug abuse, presumably as a coping mechanism, and the massive emigration. Millions of Zimbabweans leaving.
Including skilled professionals.
Yeah, a significant proportion of highly skilled people who then often have to take on menial, sometimes demeaning jobs in other countries just to survive. It's a tremendous loss of human capital.
It sounds like a devastating brain drain with huge personal costs for those who leave and for the country left behind.
Exactly. He paints this picture of the diaspora experience often being quite harsh, highly educated people facing underemployment.
But there's a paradox there.
Yeah, he suggests a grim paradox. This very exodus, along with the social fragmentation, might inadvertently benefit the ruling party by further diminishing the capacity, the organized will of the citizens left behind to challenge the existing power structures.
Moving on to the opposition, Biti doesn't exactly pull his punches there either.
No, he doesn't. What's interesting is his broad definition of opposition. He argues it's not just formal political parties.
Right.
It encompasses the widespread anger, the deep frustration felt by a huge chunk of the population, including many in the business community. He says vividly you could cut the anger and frustration with a knife.
So there's this massive undercurrent of dissatisfaction.
Deep well of discontent, yeah.
But the formal political opposition isn't effectively tapping into it.
That's precisely his critique. He expresses disappointment. Lack of strong, resilient institutions within the formal opposition.
Why is that, according to him?
He points to internal divisions, which he believes are often, let's say, worsened by the ruling party's influence. He uses that strong phrase, corrosive tentacles of ZANU-PF.
Okay.
And a vulnerability to bribery, what he calls checkbook politics. Basically using money to undermine opposition figures. He paints a picture of a somewhat fragmented, maybe even compromised formal opposition.
He also touches upon a worrying societal shift in values. That sounded quite disheartening.
Yes, he expresses real worry about who society's role models seem to be now. He remembers a time when education, intellectual pursuits, professional achievement were highly respected. Shares that anecdote about admiring his late uncle's learning.
Yeah.
Now, he laments the figures he calls brigands, imposters, runners, people gaining influence through dodgy means, had become the individuals many look up to.
That's a serious indictment.
It is. He notes a disturbing trend where even formerly respected people seem willing to seek small favors from these less than admirable types. It signals a potential erosion of the very values that underpin a healthy society.
It's a stark contrast, suggesting a real weakening of societal norms. Despite this rather bleak outlook, Batty does offer some hope, doesn't he? A way forward focusing on dialogue and what he calls a soft landing.
This is absolutely vital in his analysis. He strongly emphasizes the urgent need for this soft landing to prevent a potentially violent, chaotic implosion.
And how do we get there?
Through genuine dialogue, he says, a spirit of accommodation, meaningful reconciliation, and a period of national introspection. He draws that compelling parallel with South Africa's transition through CODISA.
But he also notes there isn't widespread enthusiasm for this soft landing idea. Why does he think that is?
He gives two key reasons. First, he argues the ruling elite are largely insulated from the daily hardships.
Living in a bubble.
Pretty much. They don't directly feel the urgency for change. Second, he points out that the general population, through sheer resilience and, well, ingenuity, has become incredibly adept at coping,
Finding ways to get by.
finding ways to mitigate the effects of the crises in their daily lives. This coping, while showing amazing strength, might inadvertently reduce the immediate pressure for those big systemic reforms.
That's a fascinating, slightly paradoxical point. The people's resilience might lessen the immediate push for the changes BBI thinks are crucial. But he still sees dialogue as absolutely essential, right?
Absolutely. He hammers this home. A broad-based national dialogue is the only viable path forward. And he's specific about who needs to be included.
Who's on his list?
War veterans, the army, students, professionals, labor unions, the informal sector often overlooked business, and crucially, the diaspora. They have a huge stake in the future.
Bringing all those diverse voices together.
That's the only way, he believes, to forge a shared understanding and collectively chart a sustainable path.
And are there any immediate areas of potential agreement, common ground to start this dialogue?
Yes. He suggests several critical areas where consensus could be built, acting as catalysts. First and foremost, defending the current Constitution, the 2013 one.
Which had massive public support.
Exactly, 93% voter support in the referendum. He sees this as a unifying principle. Second, the long-standing, very contentious land question. Needs open, honest conversation about solutions, including that debate about privatization, title deeds. And thirdly, the absolute necessity of honestly confronting the painful past, suggesting a truth and reconciliation process for historical grievances, injustices, insecurities.
Like Gukurahundi.
He specifically mentions the horrific Gukurahundi massacres as a prime example of trauma that needs acknowledgement and addressing. Shares that personal connection through his lawyer friend King, who was affected.
These definitely sound like fundamental issues. You can't really move forward without tackling them head on. But E.T. also touches on specific economic reforms.
Yeah, he calls for much greater transparency in macroeconomic policy. Advocates for a stable, agreed-upon exchange rate, strict limits on government budget deficits, and debt accumulation.
And devolution.
And genuine implementation of devolution, as laid out in the 2013 Constitution. Underlying all this, though, he raises that profound question about national identity. What does it truly mean to be a Zimbabwean?
That's a big one.
Huge. He points out the vastly different experiences, feelings of belonging across the country. Harar versus, say, Plumtree. Shares his own discomfort with how Zimbabwe is often seen internationally. This question of shared identity, he suggests, is crucial for building any kind of unified future.
That question of national identity really cuts to the heart of it, doesn't it? You need that shared sense of belonging for any collective effort. He also looks beyond Zimbabwe's borders for lessons.
While he's very firm that dialogue and solutions must be internally driven, Zimbabwean-led.
Right.
He does suggest there could be value in learning from the experiences of respected African elder statesmen. Leaders like former presidents Chissano and Mbeki, maybe even Obasanjo, despite his age.
Shared wisdom.
Yeah. He recounts that poignant chat with the late Kenneth Kaunda about the immense burdens of public office. It speaks to the value of shared experience in navigating these complex national challenges.
Shifting focus slightly, Absponti, having been finance minister, gives some really interesting perspectives on that role, especially in Zimbabwe's political climate.
He really emphasizes the critical importance of a finance minister being guided by a clear ideology, rooted in a strong value system.
Not just managing numbers.
No. He contrasts left-wing and right-wing economic approaches and criticizes the current government for what he sees as a lack of coherent ideology.
And the practical challenges.
He highlights the constant, often overwhelming struggle. Very limited fiscal space facing seemingly endless demands. stresses the need for a finance minister to have the political courage to just say no sometimes,
Tough job.
and to prioritize strategies that actually expand the whole economy through investment. Interestingly, he expresses quite a bit of confidence that he could manage the economy effectively, even now.
Really?
Yeah, recalls a time under Mugabe when he apparently had trust and significant autonomy, a blank check, he calls it, to implement reforms. He even shares an anecdote about proving resources were being distributed fairly across ministries, highlighting transparency.
That's a bold claim and fascinating about that period of trust. He also outlines some very specific economic reforms he thinks should happen immediately.
He lays out 3 critical priorities. First, float the local currency, the zygo. Let it find its natural market value while realistically acknowledging the US dollar is still going to be significant.
Okay.
Second, rigorously control the money supply. Amend financial management acts to put strict limits on government overdraft and borrowing from the central bank.
Stop printing money, basically.
Essentially, yes. And third, implement what he calls an agent stimulus, targeted help for struggling industries suffering from lack of overall demand. He's quite critical of the current Reserve Bank governor's focus on closing businesses, says it's counterproductive.
What else?
Beyond those, tackling corruption, stopping the leakages of revenue from mineral exploitation, including rare earths, and again, addressing the debt and land questions, specifically getting rid of export surrender requirements, which he thinks are damaging and maybe unconstitutional.
It's a clear, comprehensive set of proposals. Towards the end of the interview, Biti gets quite reflective, quite personal, doesn't he?
Yeah, he speaks very candidly about this huge personal toll his political career took. Even apologizes to his children for the impact on their lives, their relationships.
That must have been difficult.
He emphasizes needing a better balance between public service and private life if he did it again, and stresses the need for more internal hygiene within opposition movements,
Meaning?
holding themselves to the same high standards they demand from the ruling party. Ethics, accountability.
And he shares a fundamental lesson he learned about building things for the future.
Yes, a key learning. Build new institutions, a new Zimbabwe, based on robust checks and balances. Even a degree of healthy mistrust built into the system itself.
Not just relying on personal trust.
Exactly. He argues relying only on personal trust is risky, can lead to reproducing the same old problems. He sees this pattern even in churches.
Interesting.
And he passionately advocates for citizens to reclaim their agency. Don't passively outsource thinking and autonomy to leaders. He draws inspiration from citizen action in places like Mozambique and Kenya.
Taking responsibility.
Right. He values humility, personal accountability in public life, expresses strong opposition to removing presidential term limits, sees it as a dangerous power grab, believes current talk of extending limits is misguided, will likely lead to more conflict.
And his view of the current president
Characterizes him as a weak man despite the powerful office, leading to governance by executive order rather than consensus and soft power.
Finally, Bataille offers some reading recommendations for deeper understanding.
Yeah, suggests his own books, the Democracy books, In the Name of the People on Populism, and his new one, A Blueprint on Fighting Dictatorship.
And literature.
Powerful literary works. Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera, Lorena Nkobo's Mind Blast, Tsitsi Dangaremga's The House of Hunger. Even mentions learning valuable lessons from sports, the humbling, equalizing nature of competition.
That's quite a diverse and thought-provoking list, and he wraps up with a final, powerful call to action.
He strongly reiterates that urgent, critical need for a comprehensive national dialogue, emphasizing that defending the Constitution, the country's legal foundation, should be the immediate unifying point for all Zimbabweans, regardless of politics.
So, to bring together the key insights from this incredibly rich discussion, Tendai Biti paints this picture of Zimbabwe grappling with these deep cyclical crises. A state increasingly disconnected from citizens' daily lives, a formal opposition facing significant internal challenges, and these profound social costs tearing at the fabric of society.
But importantly, he also articulates a potential path forward, emphasizing that urgent need for broad-based national dialogue built on shared values and a collective commitment to the Constitution.
You, the learner, now have hopefully a much deeper understanding of these multifaceted, interconnected challenges facing Zimbabwe, straight from someone who's been right in the thick of it.
Yeah, take some time to consider those historical patterns Biti outlines, the far-reaching social consequences he describes so vividly, and the potential avenues for a more stable, prosperous future he proposes.
And on that note, Tendai Biti leaves us with a really fundamental, maybe uncomfortable question. In the face of such deep division, such complex history, what does it truly mean to be Zimbabwean?
And can a unifying national identity be forged that can actually navigate this difficult path ahead?
It's a crucial question, certainly gives us all significant food for thought. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
They were on the streets.
We saw what happened in Kenya.
We saw what